All right, so now we are going to switch gears and talk about a different panel that it's not so much biomedicine, but rather ecology and evolutionary biology. In particular, my application went to panel LS8, which is the one on environmental sciences, ecology, and evolutionary biology. So let me start by telling you a little bit my timeline and my path to the ERC grant. I graduated at the end of 2011 at Universidad Complutense de Madrid. I'm a zoologist by training. And then I spent 4 years at Harvard University with several grants, postdoctoral grants. But what I would like to share with you today is that after my PhD, I started to apply to the Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowships, which, as some of you know, may be kind of slightly similar to an ERC. So for me, it was a great exercise to start writing my own projects in the setup and in the context that the European Commission tends to fund and to value. So I did it twice. I failed. I came from a very small lab without a lot of international expertise. So I was kind of on my own. I needed to search for other mentors and support. So the beginning of this experience was kind of tough. My first project was really bad and got very low in the list. Of course, not funded. And then in 2014, I tried it again, and it got better, but still not funded. As I gained expertise and as I got more and more proficient in writing projects, I managed to get my postdoc funded, this time to come to Barcelona on a second postdoctoral fellowship that was also funded by Juan de la Cierva Incorporación. And it was right before coming on my second postdoc when I started to think about applying to an ERC grant. And this is because the first time I heard about the ERC grants was actually when I was still living in Boston. In there was an academic fair with different stands from different governments or universities, institutes, and so on and so forth. And the European Research Council had one there. And it's when I first heard about this funding instrument, and I thought, wow, this is absolutely great. So I kind of kept it in mind. And since I kind of started my independent path slowly, obviously during my postdoc that and later on got consolidated with the start of my own lab, I thought that why not? This is a great instrument to give it a try. So in 2018, I applied to the Ramon y Cajal, and I got the grant. And since I knew that I was going to start my own lab, I started to think on the type of research I wanted to lead as an independent researcher. And the ERC came to my mind, and I started to think on the project. I applied in 2019 for the call of 2020, coinciding with this transition between my postdoc and the start of my lab. And I was also on maternity leave. While you are changing diapers, sometimes your mind has some free space to think of science. And I used like 3 or 4 months during all these periods in this like year or year and a half to actually write the proposal. And I started my own lab at the beginning of 2020, and I heard about my successful outcome of the ERC later that year. Around summer. So I was very lucky because by the end of the year, I had the funding of the ERC to start my lab like at full speed pretty much. So today I want to share with you 10 tips that for me I found very helpful in the moment when I was thinking on how to start preparing my application. The first one is look yourself in the mirror. Because as Maria was anticipating, you need an excellent project, but you also need to have a very good track record. I don't think you need papers in Nature, Science, or Cells necessarily, but you do need to show that you are capable of independent and creative thinking. They are going to value this very strongly. And what I recommend is to check who has been funded before in previous calls, because this information is available, and also what type of projects have been funded in previous calls as well. So, don't be too tough on yourself, but also don't be naive, because it takes a lot of time and energy and mental preparation to prepare an ERC proposal. And I think it's definitely worth waiting for the right moment to do so. My tip number 2 is about the projects. Which is what Maria described as this eureka moment. I call it the wow idea. So you really need to think of a project that when you tell people about your project, people say, wow, this is wow. So I like this graph a lot that I took from this webpage, and it describes perfectly how the idea should be, and the difficulty in implementing it. You should not be too crazy in terms of your idea, because it needs to be feasible. You need to be able to do the project, but it needs to be creative enough and original enough that it's pushing the limits of your field. So for me, the best way of identifying a wow project is when, regardless of the outcome, the results of the projects are going to be great no matter what. Even if your main expectations are not reached, but what you figure out during the life of your project is still pushing the boundaries. This is what I would describe as a wow project. Like, no matter what, they will give you money, because the knowledge that you will generate is going to push the boundaries of your field. So a small tip that also helped me figure out how to start organizing the proposal, because I mean, this is a lot of money. It is a very long period. It's 5 years. I was used to write postdoc fellowships that are usually for a couple of years, and of course a much smaller magnitude. So what helped me figure out how to do it was to think of my project as 4 or 5 independent Marie Curie or postdoc projects, because I had this experience that I told you before with the Marie Curie projects. I said, okay, so perhaps what I can do is to take my big project and try to find units that are like similar to postdoc projects, and then of course you need to work on making them coherent and coordinated between each other. But this kind of helped me face the fear of how to start writing such a big project for such a long time. Because at the end, you have to think that people are going to be doing these projects. You're going to recruit members, team members. And so it's kind of natural way of organizing your projects, right? Like, you have like independent sub projects that each independent person is going to be doing, and then you just think on how you can coordinate that. The third tip, it's something that I heard in ERC information session that was held here in Barcelona, where different awardees and different panel members led. And I remember there was this panel member that said this sentence: be 100% in love with your project. And for me, it has been one of the most insightful tips, because you will need to learn a lot about this. You will need to read all the literature you can about your topic, and you will need to defend this project. You will need to find the weaknesses and show the panel that you are able to work them out, to come out with great knowledge at the end. And this is what the panel members want. They want to see that you are 100% convinced and confident in your project. So if you are in love with your project, if you love it so much that you really, really, really want to uh, develop that project, I think this is gonna be somehow tangible in your in the way you write it and in the way you defend it later on. So I think something important is not only to be in love, but also to be comfortable with what you include. I would recommend you not to include methodologies or approaches or sections if you are not confident about them, just because they are cool or state of the art, right? Like, I don't know, right now, like in my field, single cell, it's becoming a very important methodology that everyone is applying, or CRISPR-Cas or things like that. So, you know, like think something that makes sense for your project, but don't force it, because if you don't force it, if you force it, you may end up with some gaps and weaknesses that are going to be very noticeable later on in the evaluation process. The tip number 4 is to assess high risk correctly. As you all know, the ERC seeks to fund high risk, high reward projects. And I took this graph from this webpage. This is one of like a consulting company that helps with grant proposal preparation. And it doesn't need to be too ambitious. It doesn't need to be like incremental, but it needs to be in this space here that is kind of complicated. I think we may need to mute someone. Yes, thank you. Okay, so the project has to involve a conceptual challenge, not an operational challenge, not like, okay, I did this, I know how to do this, I'm gonna do it 10 times. It needs to go somewhere else, beyond that. So I think that this is one of the main problems that we all have when we try to identify what this means in our own field or in our own project. And I found this paragraph also in this webpage that I think it's really helpful. So so it says that an effective method to help you identify the conceptual risk of your project could be by first thinking on the level of uncertainty that is involved in the research. You do want uncertainty because you don't want to have a project where you know the outcome. This is not the type of proposal for that. And the second is to assess the extent and amount of assumptions required in order to develop your project. So there's this sentence that pretty much conveys the main message, which is if the answer to your research question is clear, or if there are good estimations about the project outcome, then the conceptual risk is low. So in other words, you need a project where somehow you don't know the answer, you don't know what's going to happen at the end of the project, but whatever happens, it's going to push the boundaries of the fields, as I anticipated before. Something very important to take into account is, again, the feasibility, because you may have a very crazy idea that fits here. It's like too ambitious, or your project, yeah, you have a great idea and it's definitely pushing the conceptual boundaries, but it's not doable, it's not feasible, right? So then they are not going to fund that. And you have to keep in mind that how you do it, it's your decision. So you have to find a way of making a project feasible. And in this concept, in this context, risk management is very important. Of course, they're going to give you a lot of money to do kind of crazy things. So many risks may show up in the way. It is very important that you think beforehand about some of them and that you show them in your written proposal and later on in your interview that you have been already thinking of that, and that you have a plan B in case your first methodology approach fails. My tip number 5 would be check out available resources. Well, we are here today giving these talks in this workshop, but there are tons of resources out there that are super helpful. So the ones that I would recommend the most are the ones from the European Research Council themselves. So if you go to their YouTube channel, they have this series called ERC classes, where different ERC people people working for the ERC are giving you tips and information on how to prepare either the written part, like the B1 part or the B2 part, or even the interview. So I strongly encourage you all to go there and check their official material because it's absolutely great. In Spain, at least, we have some other resources that I find really interesting and helpful. For example, FECIT has something called ERC Reading Days. They organize these every year in different cities. So basically, they ask former awardees for their proposals and their evaluations on a voluntary basis. And then they organize these reading days where people thinking on applying can go and read the proposals. So you're allowed to select a couple of them. They will share with you a list from all the people that have volunteered their proposals and evaluations, and you can choose a couple of them. And then you go physically to a place, and they bring you the proposals in paper, and they give you like a couple of hours or 3 hours, and you can just take notes about them. They won't send you in electronic format the proposals because of course this is very private at the end. These projects are very private, right? But there are tons of people kind enough to volunteer their projects for everyone to have an idea of how a winning ERC proposal looks like. And then I would also recommend checking resources from your universities or institutes. I'm in CSIC, and for example, in CSIC we have support as well. So I'm sure that most universities have them in place. The tip number 6 is know your audience. As Maria also anticipated before, I think it's very helpful to share your ideas, your proposal, even if it's at an early stage with experts in the field. So in my case, my panel is this one, environmental biology, ecology, and evolution. My proposal was on evolution, but in terms of methodology was in genomics, which could be a little bit far away from some ecologists that may be in the panel or environmental biologists. So what I did is to share it with 5 ERC awardees from the same panel in all the main areas, evolutionary biology, but also genomics, also ecology, and so on and so forth, to get an idea on how they were interpreting the research. Because even though, of course, they won't be able to go into details on the methodology, their tips can be very helpful for you in how to pitch your proposal. And also another type of audience you should be aware of and you should do some research of is the potential panel members. So there's in the webpage of the ERC, there's a tool, as an engine where you can search who has served in the panel in the previous like 10 years or so. So this is very helpful because you can check potential reviewers. As Maria also mentioned, like 60 to 70% of the panel members may be the same ones. They switch every 2 years. So if you're applying in 2025, you should check who was in your panel in 2023, and you will see all the names. And this can help you figure out the type of expertise that is going to be in the panel evaluating your project. And I think this is definitely really informative on how to pitch your proposal. Tip number 7 is about a timeline, because I feel that a lot of people, including myself, are stressed out a lot about how to start preparing your proposal because it's big, there's a lot at stake, and so on and so forth. So what I would suggest is think about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses when you are preparing a proposal? Are you good at writing? Are you good at making figures and reading and digesting literature, making connections in your brain about ideas or developing ideas? And identify in which step you need more time. Like in my case, for example, it took me 1 or 2 years to develop the ideas. I'm a person that I need to have everything clear in my head. And once I have it, I can write the proposal relatively really fast. But it took me 1 or 2 years to think of everything, and until it was not super clear in my head, I was not able to write it down. But there are other people that need more time writing, and they develop the ideas as they write. So in this case, you may need to accommodate longer times to writing. Also, you may need help making figures. You may want to hire an illustrator helping you with some figures to making your proposal more appealing. So in that, if that's the case, you can start also thinking what type of resources you have. Like there are universities or institutes that may give you some economical resources to make that happen. So it's worth exploring that. My tip number 8, this is after I started the project, but I wish I had known it before. It's talk to your university or institutes about the timing and the budgets, and particularly the main managers or gerentes or something like that. Go with your budget and tell them what you have in mind, because in order to be able to make your science happen, these words that are purely scientific will translate into bureaucratic and other type of management related words, such as public tenders and title equivalencies and so on and so forth. So in my case, for example, that I work in genomics, I had a huge amount of money dedicated to data generation, and it's very good to know how long you will need in order to do all the required paperwork to start using that money, because this can delay your projects. The 9th tip would be pay attention to your ethical self-assessment, if that's the case. So in my case, my proposal is about invertebrates, but I also had vertebrates. I'm realizing now I never told you what my proposal was about. I think Maria did at the beginning. It's about understanding the origin of animal terrestrial biodiversity. So there are tons of invertebrates, but also vertebrates. We vertebrates managed to colonize land from marine ancestors. So once the word vertebrate was included in my proposal, it went straight to the ethics panel. So they told me, okay, we are going to fund your project. Congratulations. But then I received another letter saying we cannot proceed with the grant agreement until you have cleared the ethics panel. And this took like 3 months, because they meet every few months. But if you have research with I don't know, human data or vertebrates or cell lines or some other resources that requires ethics clearance, I think it's worth checking with your ethics department to include this information beforehand in your proposal. And the tip number 10 is submit your proposal and don't look back, because I don't know, at least I when I submitted my proposal, I was just anxious and scared, right? Like, is it good enough? And so, relax. You have a few months in front of you before you figure out what's gonna happen. And more importantly, what I like to share with you is that for me, preparing an ERC proposal is definitely a win-win situation, regardless of the outcome. Of course, you may get your ERC project funded, but if not, the most important thing for me is that you are gonna have all these ideas already in your head, and these are gonna guide the research in your lab for the next 5 years or even more, which is absolutely great. And you will be able to take parts of your big ERC project and apply to other sources of funding. So most of the work that you do for your ERC, you will be able to recycle to start with or to continue with your own research. So it's an exercise that is definitely always worth doing. And this is it on my side. Good luck, everyone.